Hi, I'm Kaden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
Oh man, has it been a minute since we got to that intro. Welcome back to Eating W's for probably really like the official start, quote unquote, of the 2024 season. The draft is, of course, technically what we talked about the most, the first 2024 thing we talked about. But when we do these episodes, which you'll learn about here in a second, it means that we're really starting to get into the season. We're getting to those not single digit, but rather double digit countdown for how many days until opening day kickoff. So it is just getting so real, getting so exciting. I want to say we're somewhere in the like 80s, low 80s days till opening kickoff. So really exciting stuff there.
It's 10 Sundays.
10 Sundays, there you go.
I'm
10
pretty
weeks.
sure that's what it is, yeah.
I like it. That's a better way to think
I
of
like
it
it
anyway.
looking at it like
Yeah,
that.
I agree. But so as mentioned, what we will be doing is something that we do every year, starting here with the quarterbacks, but we're going to do our top 10 predictions, starting with our top 10 quarterbacks, and then it'll be next week our top 10 running back duos, and then finally finish it off as we always do with our top 10 wide receiver trios. That good old even 1, 2, 3 in a row there. But to start counting up to 1, 2, 3, you got to start with 1. So today we are going to be talking about our top 10 quarterback predictions for the 2024 NFL season. And we will just jump right into it. No point in going through all the news that we've missed. But we won't start with 10. We will actually start, as we always do, with our honorable mentions. So, Callan, take it away.
And I want to start here with the honorable mention of all these quarterbacks coming off of the injury that they had season-ending injuries last year. I'm talking about guys like Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Joe Burrow, guys, even Daniel Jones. It'll be interesting to see how he comes out. He's basically playing for his quarterback career, so
Quite literally,
he has to play better or he's not going to be in the league. But anyways, talking about these quarterbacks, it's hard to tell where exactly they're going to be in the top 10 for this year because these are major injuries they're coming off of. You know, Aaron Rodgers with the Achilles, Joe Burrow even with the wrist injury, you know, that could affect his throwing for the rest of his life. You know, we'll see how he comes off of that. So I really am interested to see how well these quarterbacks play coming off these major injuries, because at one point in time, these guys were top 5, top 3 quarterbacks, and they probably would be in most top 10 lists, you know, to start the year. But I wanted to group them all into one because there are so many of them that happened last year. And I just want to give them the honorable mention because it'll be interesting to see how they fare coming off those major injuries.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just looking through the list here. 2 other quarterbacks coming off of a season-ending injury: Deshaun Watson of the Browns and Anthony Richardson with the Colts.
That's right. I knew there were 2 more.
Yeah, so that's actually a very interesting one. I really like the honorable mention because you're right. It is complete toss-ups there. My honorable mention, moving over to my side of things, I could not do a list without the purple and gold, so I threw them in the only place that it really felt right. My honorable mention is Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, a lot of people have practically already scratched J.J. McCarthy in as the starter for them, but there's just no reason to have J.J. McCarthy be the starter week 1. He did run a pro-style offense. He is a pro-ready quarterback, in my opinion, but why not start Sam Darnold? You gave him $10 million for this year. See what he can do. This poor guy has never really gotten a chance. The most chance he has gotten to play for an actual well-run offense with weapons around him was in San Francisco last year, in which he only started 1 game, and I can't remember if they won or not, but he played really well for the fact that it was his first start of the whole year in Week 18 against the Los Angeles Rams. So, I mean, if you give him a whole offseason to really memorize and live in that playbook, and then give him a quarterback whispering coach like Kevin O'Connell, I think that he has a chance to really do something. Do I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback? No, but I just think he should get a lot more credit than people give him. And I think that he could easily hold J.J. McCarthy out for the whole season, just depending on how his play is. So now we will jump into the actual top 10 rankings, and I'll have Callan take it away with his number 10.
And at number 10 here, I got C.J. Stroud. Now, I am a little hesitant to put him into this top 10 list, but just because he's coming off only a rookie performance, which was very outstanding. But will it sustain? Will it show up from year to year to year? I mean, yes, some of these guys have got C.J. Stroud in the top 5, which I think is really high for him because he's just coming off of 1 year. But when you say that, you can say that about Jordan Love too, but we'll talk about him a little bit later. I got my reasons for him being a little bit higher than C.J. Stroud. But I think that Stroud, though, will be another outstanding quarterback. I don't know if he'll be able to match this rookie numbers just because they were very outstanding, and that consecutive streak without throwing an interception, I mean, that might never be matched again. So that will be interesting to see, if he's able to sustain that capability of keeping the ball from turning it over. But if he is able to do that, I definitely think he'll be a top 10 quarterback. I think he's just on the top 10 or at the 10 spot, though.
I like it. You always got to be afraid of that sophomore slump.
Mm-hmm.
Opposite of sophomore slump is a super, 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 super senior slump. Moving on to my top 10, I have the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers coming off of that Achilles tear. Now, of course, Callan had all of his injured quarterbacks. I actually have some injured quarterbacks on my list, 2 in a row actually, which you'll see here in a second. But I put Aaron Rodgers at 10 here because, I mean, I have just counted Aaron Rodgers out so many times as a Vikings fan, and I refuse to keep doing it. I am like 5 times bitten, 10 times shy at this point, dealing with this immortal man, Aaron Rodgers. I think that if he can stay healthy, the Jets have really improved their offensive line this offseason and really made that a focus. He still has the weapons at receiver like Garrett Wilson. He's getting up there in age, but he was never an athletic freak. He won with his knowledge. He won with his game preparedness, and he won with just that flick of the wrist throw that he had, which does not seem to go away with age at all. So that's why it's a little risky. He's got to stay healthy, but I do think Aaron Rodgers can still be a top 10 quarterback, barely.
Yeah, I talked about him a little bit coming off the injury. I'm counting him out. Maybe I'll be the one that's his first time bitten here because I wasn't sure what to think going in last year, and then he had the Achilles tear, and I just think that that's going to be too much for him to come back off of. I think he'll be a decent quarterback, but I think that they're going to have another down year for the Jets. And I think it's going to be a disastrous season for Aaron Rodgers, unfortunately for him.
It could easily be. There's no doubt.
And on to number 9, I got Trevor Lawrence here. And I think that Trevor Lawrence, who just got a big contract extension, 5 years, 125,
something like that.
Something like that. He's now tied with Joe Burrow as the highest annual paid quarterback, with like $55 million a year or something like that.
Yep.
So he's getting paid big time quarterback money, and we always thought he would. Even back at Clemson, we knew Trevor Lawrence was going to be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL eventually. Maybe it didn't happen right away like some thought that it would, but I think that he's really turned the corner and shown that he can be the leader of the Jaguars franchise. And now he's got a revamped wide receiver room. They did lose Calvin Ridley, but they brought in Gabe Davis, who is a big game playmaker, to replace him. And I think that they're going to do very well, the Jaguars, led by Trevor Lawrence, who's going to have a top 10 quarterback season and even be a dark horse for an MVP conversation.
Oh, interesting. I have Trevor Lawrence sitting just outside of my top 10, literally at that like 11 or 12 range. But it's interesting they gave him that much money, but we'll have to see if he makes it worth it in the long run. Moving on to my number 9, I have another quarterback coming off of an injury. I have Kirk Cousins in the Atlanta Falcons. And literally the main reason I have Kirk Cousins as a top 10 quarterback here is I truly do think he is a top 10 talented quarterback. He is really good with that. But where he really thrives is when he can get not carried per se, but when he can let the run game do its thing and then really lean into that play action game. And I mean, they have not the most talented receiver core, but they have some big guys and some big play threats like Drake London, who I could see having a huge season. And I could see Kyle Pitts finally really finding his stride there in Atlanta because now he has a quarterback like Kirk Cousins who loves the middle of the field, loves his tight ends, loves his big body receivers. So I just think a lot of things are coming together really well for Kirk Cousins right here. But just like Rodgers, that big exclamation mark is he has to stay healthy because he can't be a top 10 quarterback if you miss half the season. It's just straight up like that.
Yeah, those guys, they get counted out. I mean, that year that Carson Wentz, he was an MVP favorite up until week 15 when he tore his ACL. And then it was just out the door, and he didn't even get a vote. But when you talk about Kirk Cousins, he's kind of in the same boat as Aaron Rodgers. He's up there in age. He's kind of, gone based off of, that game preparedness, not really being mobile. He's kind of that pocket passer, which, it works well for him. But like you said, I think the key thing here is the tight end. And I think that the tight end is going to be a big play factor this year for the Falcons and Kirk Cousins. And I think that if he's able to get that connection going with Kyle Pitts, the way that he used Kyle Rudolph, and they were actually had to trade for TJ Hawkinson to bring in a stalwart at tight end for the Vikings. Kyle Pitts could have a resurgence kind of year this year. And I think it finally will be the Kyle Pitts year just because of Kirk Cousins, as long as he himself can stay healthy.
So much talent. It's got to break out eventually. It really does.
It does. And moving on to number 8, I got Matthew Stafford of the LA Rams. And I think that he played a fantastic 12 games last year. He was hurt for a little while. He didn't play a whole season. It's not likely he'll play a whole season, but I think that as long as he is there for the long run and there for the playoff run, the Rams are always going to be a dangerous team. And I think that Matthew Stafford, if he is able to put together a full season, will have top 10 quarterback numbers. And I think that there's a chance that he could be even higher than number 8 by the end of the NFL season next year.
Interesting. I really like Matthew Stafford. Even when he was in Detroit and a rival, he was always one of my favorites. So I don't personally have him in my top 10, but I wish the best for him. I really do. Moving on to my number 8, I just realized a third guy in a row coming off of a year-ending injury. I have Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he just has, more than anything with Joe Burrow, he has that clutch factor. He has the Joe Chill or whatever, Joe Cool. I can't remember what exactly they call him. But he's got so much really good talent around him and a coach that I really like in Zach Taylor. So I'm not saying by any means he's not a top 10 talent quarterback, because he definitely is. The way he comes prepared for every game, the physical attributes he has, how sneaky good he is on his feet, and just the pure talent at quarterback, of course. But more than anything, he just really knows how to take advantage of a good situation, and he is in such a good situation. I know T. Higgins is. Did he sign?
He signed.
He did sign.
Actually
Okay.
did sign. That's
so
probably one of the biggest things that happened.
I know they lost Tyler Boyd, but that's not a huge thing there. You can find a guy to fill in there. You still have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I think if, again, one more time, final exclamation mark, he's just got to stay healthy. Because ever since even his rookie year, he's shown that he kind of struggles to stay healthy. But the one year he did stay healthy, he went to the Super Bowl. So
yeah, and he's definitely has the possibility to be a top 10 quarterback in this league. He's one I did have in my list before I grouped them all into the honorable mention. Just because he's quite a bit younger than these other quarterbacks coming off of injury. Some of them. And I think because of that, his youth will really help him in his recovery. And even though I didn't mention it is a wrist injury, so it could affect his throwing motion. I'm not exactly sure. I've never really had a wrist injury like that or heard of one
really sure either. Yeah.
I've heard of broken wrists, but I never knew of it to cause a season ender, which I thought that was kind of weird. His wrist was a season ending.
Was it right or left?
I thought it was his right, because I remember when they had him throwing.
Oh, he would, yeah.
He would throw, and the ball would just drop.
Yeah,
it would just go dead.
It was right. I think you're right.
So I'm pretty sure it is the right arm or the right wrist. So because of that, it could leave some potential to them possibly having a down year while he recovers from that wrist injury and maybe has to revamp his throwing motion. But I think that he will get it figured out, and that the Bengals will be just fine. And moving on to number 7, I got Dak Prescott here. And he's coming into a contract year, so I think that he's going to play lights out. And then right up until that playoff game, he was in the MVP conversation last year. So I think that Dak Prescott is very good and can be very good for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, do they believe that he is the long-term answer? They did trade for Trey Lance. So we'll have to see next year what they do. Their Trey Lance is sitting there, and he's still a bundle full of talent and a raw prospect, but he's had a few years to sit now, so it'll be interesting to see where they go. But as far as this year goes, I think that he's going to play very well. I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback, and I think that he's going to put up more dominant numbers like he did last year, and I think that he could possibly be the number one overall free agent next year when the free agency rolls around.
Yeah, it's interesting him going into a contract year. I'll talk about him a little more later. But moving on to my number 7, I have maybe my favorite ranking on this whole list. Definitely my dark horse ranking. And may I even dare say, to kind of match Callan, maybe even my dark horse MVP candidate on my list right now.
Ooh.
I have Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. And this huge surge comes from one and one man only, and that is the fact that he now has Marvin Harrison Jr. He has a true full receiving core. He has that elite number one like he did when he had DeAndre Hopkins, which was probably some of the best football in his career when he was healthy with DeAndre Hopkins that first year. I mean, he's still young. He still has the athletic ability to escape the pocket and run around. Of course, he has those knacks on him that any running quarterback does, because I know that because I'm the one who gives them crap, the running quarterbacks. I'm the exact person. I make fun of Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson all the time. But it really is just kind of an untapped talent that a lot of people don't have, to be purely that mobile and that elite with the ball in your hands past the line of scrimmage and still have the throwing ability that these guys do. So I could see Kyler Murray finally kind of having that revamped season and really re-emerging as the player he was his rookie and sophomore year. But it is just as much as my dark horse MVP, it is very easily the one that could be the worst pick on here, and he could end up getting hurt or even healthy, be a bottom 15 quarterback. So high risk, high reward if you're betting on Kyler Murray, but I'm going to bet on the good side of him this year.
Yeah, I hardly considered Kyler Murray, but that is a very interesting pick, because I think that Kyler Murray, you talk about quarterbacks coming off of injury this year. He came off the big injury last year and didn't play until halfway through the season. He's the reason we have the Josh Dobbs, because he didn't play for half the season. But the other half of the season he did play, he showed that he is the quarterback of the future for the Cardinals. And really even though that was in doubt, he put all those doubters to silence with the second half season that he had. And the fact that they traded Josh Dobbs away once Kyler Murray came back after a couple games, and they realized that Murray was going to be back to his normal self. And he played very well, and I think that he will play very well this season. I didn't even consider him.
I feel like Cliff Kingsbury kind of like boxed him in. Like, he tried to make him the type of quarterback he wasn't. And now that they have Jonathan Gannon, a defensive-minded guy, he doesn't focus on him as much. And I think the offensive coordinator is just like, dude, you're an athletic freak. Go be an athletic freak. Go be a quarterback. Do what you want. And I think that looseness is what really helped him last year. So we'll see if he can repeat it this year.
Yeah, and then moving on to number 6, I got kind of a surprise here. I got Brock Purdy, and I got him here based on one thing, and that's winning. And the fact that he has just won ever since that he has come back or come to start for the 49ers and replaced Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, he has just been a winner. And he's gotten to the Super Bowl, he's gotten the NFC title game, and really he didn't show any like rookie mistakes or any real big, glaring holes. He's a perfect quarterback for that Shanahan system, and that's why it works so well in San Francisco. And because of that, he's going to end up putting up near top quarterback numbers, definitely top 10. And I think that if he plays a whole season fully healthy, he's also coming into not a contract year, but he can get an extension after next year. So and that's only with the 49ers. They have rights to him for the first year because he was, remember, a 7th-round pick.
Yep.
But ended up being the best quarterback out of that 2021 draft class. So
pretty comfortably at this point. Yeah.
So who would have thought, the Mr. Irrelevant? But hey, he's shown that he can be a winner, and I think that there's, until he starts losing more games, he's going to be higher up on this list than people think.
Yeah. They say wins is a quarterback stat. It's kind of true. You kind of see it. I personally just can't do it. I do respect the hell out of Brock Purdy. It's really impressive what he's done. But I think there's too many guys who could go in there and do that to make it as impressive as it should be. But nonetheless, I do really like Brock Purdy, or at the very least, really respect Brock Purdy. But moving on to my number 6, I have another little bit of a shocker. I have the Detroit Lions quarterback, Jared Goff. The resurgence he had last year. You want to talk about respect? He gained my respect. He was written off by nothing. Well, so he went to a Super Bowl, and then everyone made fun of him for going to the Super Bowl because they said he just got carried to the Super Bowl. And then he just had bad seasons in a row, and everyone said, you went to the Super Bowl, and then now you're a bust. He was just getting all of the flack that you could possibly imagine. They trade him to Detroit for Matthew Stafford. Everyone's practically saying this guy's career is over. Now he's in Detroit.
He was the throw-in.
After 1 year with Dan Campbell in that Detroit offense, he has become, I think, very arguably a top 5 quarterback in the league last year. And just what he's been able to do and kind of the emotion he brings with Dan Campbell and the rest of that very emotional team there in Detroit is just elite. He has the weapons at receiver. He's got the Amon-Ra. He's got the Jamison Williams. He's got a really good offensive line that will protect him, and he can really lean on the run game when need be. And he has Dan Campbell, who's just the ultimate hype beast. So I think a lot of things are just falling in Jared Goff's favor right now. But he has shown that he can very much choke that away. But just like Kyler Murray, I'm going to be betting on the upside with Goff this year.
Yeah, Goff definitely put up some very well respectable numbers last year. He's really shown that he can be a leader of a team, which I think was always a big knock on him. He always seemed like so quiet, very stoic. But he's really shown his emotional side and being that leader of men, for the football team. And because of that, he definitely has the potential to put up top 10 numbers. But I got Detroit kind of falling back to earth and being Detroit this year and them having a down season.
They very much kind of kicked off before they even got halfway through last year. They really did. It was 0 to 100 real quick. I could see them falling back. But we're going to slide right into my number 5 since it's already someone we talked about with the Texans sophomore C.J. Stroud. One more time in a row here again. I like to do things in triples with my list, I guess. I'm betting on the upside of a guy who's a little risky. I don't think C.J. Stroud is a risk if you put him kind of where Callan had him and that more towards the 10, but I think he is a risk if put up this high. But I mean, he had the season he had last year as a rookie. Maybe you see a sophomore slump, but another thing you look at, they bring in Stephon Diggs and get Tank Dell back off of injury, which he didn't have for the whole second half of last year.
You still got Nico Collins.
And you got Nico Collins, and you have John Mechie, who's really kind of starting to come back in it. He played a little bit last year, but I mean, the guy was fresh off of cancer that almost killed him. I mean, you got to give him at least a year to get back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
So I think that we see even more improvement and maybe even a little bit of a breakout season for John Mechie. All of a sudden, you're 4 deep and really talented receivers. So even if maybe his skill drops a little bit or maybe he kind of has a sophomore slump, I think the Texans offense as a whole just continues to grow and absolutely dominate, and he kind of gets brought up with them. So I think 2 ways of winning here. Either he steps back and the offense steps up, or he steps up and the offense steps up even more. So I really like C.J. Stroud as a top 5 guy this year.
Yeah, I see the Texans as this year's Detroit Lions.
100%.
Them doing that 0 to 100 jump and just being a frenzy of a team, and I definitely see that prospect for them this year. At number 5 for me, I still got Justin Herbert, who is coming off of a down year, and he's come into a new system, new coach, a run-heavy coach. But I think that just talent-wise alone, Justin Herbert has the arm talent to be a top 10 quarterback. You got a revamped wide receiver room, which is really a lot of those there's a lot of those this year. Revamped wide receiver rooms all around the NFL. We'll talk about that in Buffalo too here shortly. But as far as the Chargers go, they got a young receiving core. I think that they'll still be able to get the ball downfield. Now they got Harbaugh running the offense, which is going to be a ground and pound style, but I still think that Herbert will want to throw the ball downfield, and because of that, he'll be able to put up the numbers to be a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, I love Justin Herbert. It really hurt me, a little bit of a spoiler, to not have him on my top 10 list. I had him as like a top 5 guy last year, but he kind of let me down last year. I'm still a little scorned because I had him as my fantasy quarterback, and he kind of shut the bed on me, not gonna lie. But yeah, I think there's just too many changes for him going on this year. I would love for him to prove me wrong. I really would. I want him to come out and be an absolute beast. And I think that even if he's still at the very least a top 15 quarterback, but I don't see him coming out and doing that this year. So moving on to my number 4 and another guy that we already talked about, I have Dak Prescott. I'm not going to say much here because I kind of agree with everything Callan said. It almost in the opposite way of Justin Herbert hurts me to do this because I don't really want Dak Prescott to be a top 10 and especially a top 5 quarterback, but he just is. If you look at the regular season he had, especially those home games, their point differential was astronomical. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was just a mind-blowing amount away from number 2 when it came for their point differential. So, I mean, that just shows how good of a team they are. He still has all the weapons around him and CD Lamb. But yeah, exactly. That's where I was going with it, is as long as you keep this poor guy out of the playoffs, they are absolutely golden. But we're not talking about top 10 playoff rankings. We're talking about top 10 regular season rankings. So he's just got to be this high.
Yeah, for as long as regular season stats go, he's one of the best at it. But as soon as those playoff games show up, it just seems like he loses it. I don't know.
Dak Prescott is the equivalent to warm-up games in college football, where they drive the D3 school in to face the D1 team. He really is.
He just puts up those kind of numbers, and then the playoffs come and he just forgets how to play quarterback. I don't know. But moving on to number 4, and talking about that team that beat the Cowboys last year, I got my guy Jordan Love here at number 4. Now, I had him at a few different spots before I finalized this list. I had him at 10, had him at 7, had him at 1 for a minute, but now I was like, okay, that's too much favoritism. But I like Jordan Love here as a top 5 quarterback because that last 3/4 of the season last year showed that he matured, and just like I was talking about how Jared Goff became a leader, Jordan Love became the leader of the Packers just literally through the season. And that last 3/4 to that last second half of the season, he really showed it. And because of that, and the numbers he put up and the lack of interceptions that he threw, shows me that he not only learned from Aaron Rodgers, but also from Brett Favre too. And even though Favre wasn't around the team, I'm sure they show film, especially because the quarterback coach is the same quarterback coach that Favre and Rodgers had. It's Tom Clements.
I didn't know that.
Yep. And he was Favre's quarterback coach when they transferred to Rodgers, and then Rodgers' quarterback coach to start his career, and at the end, the last few years in Green Bay. They brought him back during those MVP years of Rodgers in the final Packers years. But because of that, I think that Jordan Love will be able to capitalize on these big numbers and get a big contract from the Packers. And I think that he's going to show that he's worthy of that contract, and he's going to put up top 5 quarterback numbers next year and be even better throughout the whole season, not just part of it.
Yeah, I think we see a little bit of a sophomore slump from Jordan Love. I really do. I feel like
But it's not a sophomore.
He's
a 4. That's my point. Yeah. Is that he's gone through 4. This will be his 4th offseason now. He's a 4-year NFL veteran. That's why I don't compare him to that C.J. Stroud thing, where even though, yes, it was 1 year of performance, but his experience in the NFL and just being around and being in games and starting games before, I think that really helps him out for this long run.
That's a great point. I see what you're saying. I guess what I should say more is I think that the Packers as a whole had a little bit of a Cinderella story last year. I really do. I think with how young they are and how inexperienced they were, especially at positions like wide receiver being the big one there, and an offensive line and a couple of different other places, defensive line, I think that they really overperformed for what they should have done. And I think that they kind of used up their luck or maybe get found out a little bit. I don't think that they plummet and become a bottom team in the league by any means. I think they're still playoff contenders. I think that they still find their ways to win games. But I just don't think that Jordan Love not only takes a step up, or I think he takes a step back, and you're saying more he takes a step up, which I don't see happening, but I could so very easily be wrong because I'll give him one thing. With the way he started last year, some of those games he had in those like 3 interception games, he is resilient the way he bounced back up from those. So
yeah, he can definitely still have those Favre games.
Those Favre games, they really are.
That's what I'm going to have to get used to. He's going to go out there and might throw 3-4 interceptions. And Rodgers just didn't do that.
He's just like Favre. Some of the stuff he threw up that the receivers came down with was possibly one of the most irritating things to watch in the world as a Vikings fan.
It was very
my gosh.
breathtaking.
Packers games gave me headaches, and I'm not even a Packers fan, so that's exactly how it went. But jumping into my number 3, we'll kind of fly through these last 3 here because, spoiler, we agree on all of them. And spoiler, I think a lot of people agree on all of them. We did these lists kind of basing it mostly off pure talent of the quarterback themselves. And these just flat are, if you put them in a box, probably the 3 most talented quarterbacks in the league. Starting with number 3 in the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. Just the ability of what he's able to do with his feet is really where his game gets carried. But the fact that he's able to do what he can in the run game with himself and also has the accuracy and the understanding of the game that he does in the pocket is really impressive. I don't think anyone would ever sit here and argue that he's a top 10 pocket quarterback, but I think it's very arguable that he's kind of in that middle of the pack, top 15 pocket quarterback, and he's far and away top 2, probably number 1 running quarterback in the league. So when you combine all that, he's just so talented. I got him here at 3.
Yeah, I like him at 3 here, just because he's not the most pure passer. I'm more traditional. He's not the traditional type of quarterback. But over the past 6 years, there's only been 3 guys that have won MVP, and they've each won it twice. And that's Mahomes, Rodgers, and Lamar Jackson. So that's got to say something. Lamar Jackson is an MVP. He is one of the most valuable players to his team, and he's one of the most dynamic players in the NFL. And because of that, he's able to make plays and be a winner and lead his team to division titles. And even though he hasn't had much playoff success, because playoffs, they are a different animal.
Oh, big time.
He still puts up regular season numbers and is definitely worthy of those MVP conversations.
Yeah, and the weapons around him only continue to get better. So speaking of weapons getting not better, but worse, next up at 2, we both have Josh Allen. Josh Allen's team, his poor receiving corps, just got obliterated this offseason. There's no other way to put it. And I love Keon Coleman. I really do. I think he's going to come in and be a really good number 1 wide receiver in the league. But it might take a year or 2 for that to happen. And they don't really have the liberty of letting him develop into that number 1 receiver. They're going to kind of throw him into that fire at that number 1 and say, you're our number 1 receiver, you're not. Because they don't really have anybody else to step up and be that number 1 right now, letting Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs go in the offseason. But all of that pushed aside, looking at pure talent, this guy literally is just pure talent. Callen kind of coined the phrase hero ball, talking about Josh Allen last year, and it's so accurate. He is just able to put the team on his back like almost no one I've ever seen. And half the time, he still ends up losing with the team on his back, but he goddamn dragged them to that finish line. And the Chiefs step right past him every year, right before the end. But he drags them right up to that Super Bowl finish line every year. So the pure respect and empathy of having to watch that happen to him and all the Bills Mafia every year, makes me put him at number 2.
Yeah, just that talent-wise alone, I think he's the second best quarterback in the NFL. He's got the second best arm. He might have the best arm. That would be really interesting to see.
Just pure cannon.
Just a pure cannon, true. But he plays that superhero ball. He plays Superman. And because of that, he goes out there and wins games by himself like Favre used to. We talk about Favre. He used to go out there and do that same kind of thing. But Josh Allen does it with his feet and with his arm, which is very interesting because that man will run the ball like he is Lamar Jackson and throw it like he's Patrick Mahomes. And he's able to do that, and he's been able to do that for the last few years. And I think he'll continue to do that at least for a couple of years, but it's not going to last forever.
It's going to wear, yeah.
He's going to have some wear and tear starting to build on him.
Something's got to give. It's got to give eventually. But for right now, oh man, is it fun to watch.
It sure is.
So now moving on to our final and easily most obvious pick. We both have Patrick Mahomes here. I just said that a team always steps past the finish line in front of the Bills, and it's the Chiefs every year. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's the Chiefs. He doesn't have to quite throw the team on his back the way Josh Allen does, but he actually kind of does. It's just in a much more secretive way. I think he is just one of those guys that makes the players around him so much better that he does have them on his back, but you don't even always completely realize it. That's no knack against Travis Kelce and those guys or anything, but I think he really does make them better. He picks up a few guys like Hollywood Brown this offseason and Xavier Worthy in the draft, so the receiving and weapons around him only get better. And he's pure talent. He's just so good at everything. There's just nothing. There's no weakness to his game. Sometimes he gets a little too fancy and throws a few picks, but then most of the times when he gets fancy, it just turns into a crazy touchdown that you've never even seen happen before. It's a touchdown more than it's a pick. So it's just, there's some really small knack things that you could hit him for, but mostly he's just pure talent and still number 1.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about winning, he's winning Super Bowls. You talk about, talent, arm talent, stats. He's number 1 in them all. It's undeniable. It's irritating watching him play.
Irritating. It is.
And until someone is able to beat him, he's going to continue to be number 1. I had Brady number 1 in many, many quarterback rankings until somebody finally beat him. And one of those guys was Patrick Mahomes. And, or I guess not in the Super Bowl, but I forgot Brady beat him in the Super Bowl with the Bucks. So it wasn't Mahomes, but it was guys like Nick Foles that ended up beating Brady.
Nick Foles and Eli
Manning. So, but, and those guys aren't looked at as even top 20 quarterbacks in the NFL of all time, and they're the ones who beat the top quarterback of all. So it's, that's the NFL. That's a parody NFL.
That's the playoffs being a different animal.
That's just the playoffs being a different animal. And Mahomes has traversed through the regular season and the playoffs and shown that he can be the most dominant quarterback in the league through the playoffs and the regular season. And like I said, until somebody says or proves different, he'll continue to be number 1.
That's you got it right there. You encompassed everything. It's just irritating to watch him. If you're not a Chiefs fan, it's just irritating because he's just that damn good.
Yep.
But that was our top 10 quarterback rankings. Thank you all so much for watching. We know it's been a while, but we're going to be hitting you with 3 straight weeks of episodes this week, next week, and the one after. As mentioned earlier, just to kind of recap it, this was our top 10 quarterbacks. Next week's going to be our top 10 running back duos. And the final week is going to be our top 10 wide receiver trios. So as I already said, thank you so much for watching this episode. And make sure you stay tuned in for the next 2 weeks for those episodes because they will be just as fun. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.